Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Today we read two stories from r/backwoodscreepy, both from user CallMyBlufff. Let's begin. Something told me to go. Hi all. I've debated posting this for a long time, but never got around to it. Mainly because I try to keep this memory out of my brain. This might be a long one, but this is a creepy thing that happened to me about 4 years ago. For starters, I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan and moved onto my aunt's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that is on their property. The house is fairly old, but I loved it. It wasn't long after I moved in, though, that I started to feel uneasy in the house alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as it felt like something was watching me through them every night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company when my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house. It helped to have the company, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of scene setting, our house sat on the left side of the gravel road. At the back of the house, there was about 10 meters of backyard. And then there was a cow pasture and the cow barn. We don't own cows, but in the summer, another farmer would rent our pasture space, and so we would have them on our property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes surround the farm either. And there were tons. Every so often, when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for comfort. We had a farm dog too, who would keep the coyotes away for the most part as she was huge, but every so often, she'd wander elsewhere on the property to scout, and the coyotes would get a little too close for comfort. They always tried to lure my puppy out to them, but luckily, I kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that it takes her forever to find a spot to go potty. This is still a problem today, 4 years later, but back then it was the bane of my existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot. Sometimes, we would be out there for damn near half an hour, just so she would go, and not go in the house. Another problem of hers. Huskies, am I right? On this particular night, it was raining pretty heavily. I was not happy to be out there, and she had decided that she wasn't going to go until she found her perfect spot. We had already been out for 15 minutes, and at this point, she was also getting frustrated with the rain and wanted to go inside. But I wanted her to go before we went in, since we'd already been out there for so long. So, as any annoyed puppy mother would do, I started getting a little frustrated and would repeat, "Go, go potty," every time she'd get distracted from her objective. It was dark. I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually quiet and sleeping at this time of night. I was also hearing what sounded like a strange bird whistling, but shook it off as probably being an owl. I tried to keep it off my mind as I kept shouting and pleading, "Go!" through the rain to my small, fuzzy, white asshole. I was facing away from the pasture, and suddenly, in my left ear, I heard it. Now, one thing you should know about me is I have a very strong flight response, typically, but this froze me on the spot, as I was mostly confused at what I just heard. I tried telling myself I didn't hear it. I tried telling myself that it was just a moo from a cow that I heard wrong, but again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it again. It sounded unnatural. It was as if it came from someone who had never spoken a word before. A raspy, deep monotone. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio, but of course, there were no radios out there. Every time it said it, it sounded the exact same as the first time it was said. And whatever it was, it started repeating it, as if it had been taught a new favorite word. At this point, I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there. Then again, from behind me. This had all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point, I remember shouting out loud, "All right, don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my little furball and made a mad dash for my front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. Puppy went back to puppying immediately, obviously unbothered by it all, and happy Mum wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows. She said no, and I explained to her what had just happened to me. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me that he hadn't seen or heard anything. He said he'd check the pasture again in the morning. I spent my night hiding from the windows, with the lights and TV on loud enough to not hear anything outside. The next morning, when my uncle checked on the pasture, he found 2 calves dead. Explains the colossal cow panic that had ensued the night before. I regret this, but I didn't push for more information, as I honestly just didn't want to know. But they told me, other than that, they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. A few months later, I moved off the farm. I couldn't be in that house alone anymore, and my boyfriend and I had parted ways. A few months after that, I started going to therapy for the paranoia this had caused me. I started feeling like people were watching me, out to get me. Another few months after that, I moved out of the province for good, and finally felt safe. I'm wondering if any of you here have any idea what the hell this would have been. There's no chance there would have been someone in our field, as we were fairly far away from town and neighbors, and we have cameras that would have seen anyone enter our property. Coyotes are common, but I don't think they're capable of mimicking words. Any ideas? Now, since moving, I've had some weird related things happen as well, but can save it for another time if wanted. Thank you all. Something told me to go. Updated shenanigans. Hi again, all. I made a post a few days ago about something that happened when I lived back in Saskatchewan. I mentioned some spooky things that have happened since moving, and I decided to make a new post detailing them. It's not as crazy as that post seemed, but still fairly spooky, and these are all very recent. I believe it happened just a month ago. Okay. I've since moved 2 provinces over. Think Shoe Swamp area. Anyways, I've lived here for 3 years this coming June. Recently, I moved into my boyfriend's house in town. Our house is situated beside the main highway that goes through town, and there is a big hill with a walking path behind it. Our house leading directly to the highway. I've heard coyotes frequently on said hill, and often find coyote scat while my dog and I do our walk on the path. This isn't entirely relevant to the story, but I think having a bit of a visionary on what the area looks like can be important sometimes. Now, about a month ago, I went to take my dog out around 7 p.m. It's winter, so it was already pitch black outside. As you can probably guess from my last post, I am not a fan of going outside in the dark. Though living in town and having cameras at each end of the house does help, and I'm often just fine going out as long as the lights are on. I opened the door as I got my pup's leash on, stepped out, and felt a tug on the leash behind me. I turned around to see her refusing to go through the doorway. Think Sheba level walk refusal, This is strange for her, as she loves being outside. Would never pass up this opportunity. So, me being the loving dog mother I am, called her an asshole and started encouraging her to come out. Please note, I love my dog to death. Her nickname has become Asshole because she is, in fact, an asshole. She eventually tiptoed out behind me, and we made our way to the middle of the backyard. She seemed off still, staying low to the ground, tiptoeing across the yard. She stared off toward the side of our garbage for a couple seconds, and then bolted toward the house, dragging me with her. Note, she is about 45 pounds wet, but when she wants, she can overpower me. I blame it on her being mostly husky. So, after being dragged to the house, I also paused for a moment to look toward the garage and saw nothing. We have a motion sensing camera set up there too, and it hadn't gone off. For reference, this thing goes off if a fruit fly goes past 10 feet away from it, and my boyfriend checks it every time he gets a notification. Paranoid? Snoopy? Probably both. After seeing nothing was there, I said, "Dude, what are you doing? Please just go potty." Note that I whispered this to myself as I now have a fear of my words being repeated back to me in my ear. So we walked back out to the middle of the backyard, and again she froze and stared up towards the side of the garage. It was around this moment where I heard a familiar whistle, and Posey darted again, this time with me hot on her heels shouting, "Nope, no thanks, I get the hint." We clambered through the door at full speed, much to the surprise of my boyfriend, who was in the kitchen, and swiftly locked the door behind us. After explaining what had happened to the best of my ability, he offered to go look outside. Me, being the strong, independent idiot of a woman I am, took this as being competitive for some reason, so I responded with, "No, I can do it. Give me a flashlight." "Why?" "Couldn't say. Maybe trauma for being told I'm needy? Sudden death wish? Who knows?" Anyways, I went out with a flashlight and snuck around my own backyard for a couple minutes, along with the alley. Can't even begin to imagine what my neighbors thought of this, but I'd imagine they thought I'd lost my mind. I searched for a few minutes and found nothing around the garage, and went back inside feeling a bit better. The next night, we went out. We heard something run away from the other side of the garage, the side that doesn't have a camera, and again, we bolted back inside and away from whatever the hell it was. As we made our way back to the house, again came the short whistling noise. Later that night, my boyfriend passively mentioned that our tenant had sent him a picture of a hunk of meat that had been left outside of his door, and let us know to be cautious regarding that for our dog's sake. We had someone in town purposefully throwing poisoned hot dogs over fences to kill dogs. Finally, my boyfriend and I have both been having nightmares, and they're usually eerily similar to each other's. I've been having nightmares for over a year now, every single night. He started getting them within the last month or two, even when I'm not even home. They'll be about similar subjects, and they're almost always life or death situations. We both wake up fairly stressed from them, as they're mentally taxing on us. This is all I can think of at the moment, and we'll be sure to keep everyone updated if anything else happens. I feel like I'm going crazy, but knowing that this is now affecting my dog and my boyfriend is affirming. Again, would love to know what you all think. Thank you for reading about my crazy shenanigans. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The story in this video was read with the author's permission. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit posts. Want to support me? Check the link below where you can leave a tip if you wish. And remember, don't let the shadows get too close. Good night.